All right, so in this first video, we're going to talk about what is apologetics and some foundations. So what is apologetics? Are you apologizing to people? No, apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which can be found in 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts regard Christ the Lord as holy, ready at any time to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. And that word defense is the word apologia, which is where apologetics comes from. So apologetics is the study of the reasons of why Christianity is true, which involves historical evidence, archaeological evidence, scientific evidence, philosophical evidence, etc. So there are people called apologists who go to universities and basically they'll put a mic up and atheists can come and ask their questions or skeptics can come and question their faith, and the apologist will be able to give good answers to a lot of those questions, or if they don't know them, to be able to say, well, we'll get back to you on that. So I use those words, atheist, agnostic. What does that mean? So let me just go over a few terms. So theism is the belief that a God exists. Deism, with a D, is the belief that God exists, but, and this is where, say, Benjamin Franklin is often noted as being a deist, believes that God exists, he created the universe, but then after he created it, he kind of left, and now he sits just kind of watching us from his heavenly throne somewhere. Atheism, A means no, and theism means belief in God. So atheism is no belief in God. So those are people who do not believe in God. Now agnostic, A means no, and gnosis, with a G, is knowledge. So when someone says I'm agnostic, they're saying I have no knowledge about whether God exists. And then pantheism, pan means all, and theism means belief in God. So pantheists, like many Hindus, believe that all is God. Okay, that may seem a little confusing, but they'll say, God is in the grass, and God is in the water, and the sky, and so everything is God, and I am God, and you are God. So those are some key terms to think about as we move forward and to have an understanding of as we move forward. So I was talking about some of those people who go to universities and talk about these things. Those are apologists. And there's a few apologists I'll just make note of. There are some of the more famous ones so that you can look at their content and check them out if you'd like. One is Frank Turek. He has a website called crossexamined.org. And this guy literally goes onto campuses and has a bunch of college atheists, agnostics trying to trip him up. And he's got a lot of content on YouTube. You can check him out. Also, another one is J. Warner Wallace. You can go to coldcasechristianity.com and check him out. Frank Turek co-wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It's probably the number one book or number two book, I would say, that I recommend to someone who's never read an apologetics book. It takes you through the whole gamut of belief in God. And J. Warner Wallace wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, which again is a good book, covers a lot of avenue. There's Lee Strobel, which has a movie called The Case for Christ, where he was an atheist and became a Christian, and he takes you on that journey, investigator's journey to going through that process. Another really good apologist is Gary Habermas. This guy's been doing it since the 70s, I think. He is maybe the premier authority on the resurrection of Jesus. And you can find his stuff at GaryHabermas.com. Our next apologist is Greg Koukl. Koukl has a book called Tactics. That's probably the number one book that I would recommend for someone coming in and wanting to do apologetics, because it teaches you how to ask questions to people, and he deals with in the philosophical realm as well. And if you want someone in the science realm, check out Dr. Stephen Meyer, and you can find him at stevencmeyer.org or discovery.org. He's part of something called the Discovery Institute, where they go over and show good evidence for the belief that there is an intelligent designer that created the universe. And he's also part of a group called the ID movement, which is Intelligent Design Movement, where they show that the universe appears that it has been created by an intelligent being. Even though they may not say that it was God, and they may not say Jesus, but they give evidence, even though Stephen Meyer is a Christian, but the organization is to give evidence that an intelligent being created life, an intelligent being created and willed the universe into being. So, can truth be known? Well, yeah. To say that truth can't be known is a contradiction of sorts, isn't it? You're saying it's true that truth can't be known. So when someone says to you, well, truth can't be known, just say, well, is that true? Is it true that truth can't be known? That's what's called a self-refuting statement. We'll talk about a little bit of that. Self-refuting or self-defeating statement. It means the statement doesn't satisfy its own requirements. You are making a truth statement that truth can't be known, and yet you are assuming me to believe that what you are saying is true. You get all that? You may run into people that say, well, I only believe in science. Something is only true if it can be scientifically proven. Well, that's a self-refuting statement. That's a contradiction, because their own statement cannot be proven through science, right? So if they're saying, hey, I only believe things that are proven by the scientific method, well, their own statement cannot be proven by the scientific method. So they're basically telling you that according to their own standards, what they're telling you is completely wrong. Science is interesting because science actually discovers truth. It is not the arbiter, it is not the giver of truth. Science discovers truth. When scientists began to learn about gravity, that wasn't something that they created. It wasn't something that they created in an experiment, right? They discovered gravity. Gravity was always around before scientists ever identified it. Same with electricity. We use electricity all the time, right? But it only came into wide use in the last few hundred years. Prior to that, it was always the power to harness that electricity was always there, but we weren't utilizing that. So science discovers truth. And there are certain truths outside of science, like, for instance, logic or math. Right? Math exists. Things in the universe make sense, and those things are presupposed by science. That means science needs certain things in order to operate correctly. Right? Someone says, well, I only believe in science. I only believe in science. That's from Nacho Libre. But those people actually, for instance, scientists need the scientific method in order to do science, right? So if they never had the scientific method, they could never do science. If they didn't have math to make sense of things, they could never do science. If they didn't have logic to do their scientific experiments, they could never do science. So there are things outside of science that science needs in order to do their scientific experiments. And they can't just assume that those things exist. What about scientists being honest about their findings, right? We assume that scientists are going to be honest about their findings when they do their experiments. But that assumption means there's things outside of science that exist. Have you ever measured how much love you have for your wife. Is it 4 pounds or 5 pounds, right? There's things outside of science that exist. Within truth, those things are true. You can't say that your love for your wife is not true just because you can't measure it in pounds or in lumens. So there are things outside of science which exist. There is truth outside of science which exists. And to say otherwise is a contradiction. If someone says there's no such thing as truth, well, is that true? If someone says, well, it's true for me, but not for you, well, is that statement true for you as well, or is that true for everyone? There was a philosopher in the 18th century named Immanuel Kant, and Kant said that you can't know anything about the real world. Well, again, that's a self-defeating statement. If I can't know anything about the real world, then how can I know that the real world actually exists? Kant claims you can't know anything about the real world while also asserting that he knows that the real world is unknowable. Another philosopher very influential in the 18th century was named David Hume. Hume said, in order for something to be meaningful, it must be either mathematically sustained or scientifically verifiable. But the problem is, Hume's own statement is neither mathematically sustained or scientifically verifiable. So according to his own standard, Hume's statement means nothing. It's not supported and it's not meaningful. So when you point these things out to people, it's a very powerful thing, because people just, a lot of times they'll hear slogans or they'll see a bumper sticker here and they'll just repeat it, or they'll hear something on the internet and they'll repeat it. But if it's a self-refuting statement, you'll be able to call them out on that. Now, some people call themselves religious pluralists, right? You've seen the coexist bumper sticker. So these are people that believe that all religions are all the same. Well, isn't that their religious belief, that all religions are all the same? And why are they trying to push their religious belief on me? And aren't they just as close-minded as, say, the Christian? Because they're saying that either all religions are the same or you're wrong, right? So we say that Jesus is risen, Jesus is King, Jesus is Lord, and if you don't know him, then you will not inherit the kingdom of God. And they say, well, that's close-minded and dogmatic. But their position is just as close-minded, because they are saying either you believe that all religions are the same or you're wrong. Something is true if it's rational, supported by evidence, and best fits all of the data. Now, something can be true in one of two ways. It can be objectively true or it can be subjectively true. Something is subjectively true if it is true about the person making the statement, about the subject. So if someone said, ice cream is the best, that would not be an objective truth, that would be a subjective truth, because it is true about the person, right? Objective truths are truths that are true regardless of who you are, regardless of your culture, regardless of how you feel about it, it's still true. So if someone said, well, that ice cream is made of cream and milk, that would be an objective truth. So that is true about the object, not your opinion, or not true of the subject. Objective truths are true about the world regardless of our feelings about it. And I think as we go through this course, we will find that belief in God is an objective truth. And actually, someone can't claim to know anything objectively true unless a God is at the center of that. That's what C.S. Lewis calls a straight line. We could never know what a crooked line is unless we know what a straight line is. And so in the same way in regards to morality, which are what we ought to do, right? Good morals are doing good things that we ought to do. Bad is doing bad things. But we would never know what a good thing is unless we had something to look at that was outside of ourselves. God gives us the straight line so we can know what a straight line is. Once we know what a straight line is, then we can see that anything different from that, right, would be a crooked line. But without that standard, we wouldn't know what a crooked line is. So God gives us the standard for morals. So that's our lesson for today. We will see you in the next lesson.